Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal, not from a stranger, but from your own blood? If you've ever trusted someone too much, given them the benefit of the doubt because they shared your last name, then you'll understand exactly where the story is going. But stay with me, because this one doesn't end how you think. This story begins with a ring, an antique family heirloom passed down through generations, one that wasn't just made of gold and emerald, but layered with legacy, with secrets, with power. My niece, delicate and smiling on the outside but always watching, always calculating, wanted it more than anything. And if you're here wondering why I'd bury something so priceless, just know this. I didn't just bury the ring. I buried the truth. I buried the weapon. And I buried the one document that could change everything. Keep watching because I promise you, by the end of the story, you'll understand why some legacies should be protected not with a signature, but with silence. This isn't just about greed. It's about revenge, manipulation, and a final masterstroke that even my closest family never saw coming. Let me speak to you directly because I know why you clicked this video. You saw the title and thought, there has to be more to this. And you're right. You're here because you've seen your share of family drama, of sudden inheritance fights, of fake smiles over Thanksgiving dinner, and whispered accusations over who deserves what. And maybe, just maybe, you've experienced that moment when someone close to you crossed a line so deep, so personal, it shifted your entire perspective of love and loyalty. You're not alone. So I'm asking you, really asking you, to stay with me through this. I'm not just telling a story. I'm giving you the why. I'm walking you through every move I made and every red flag I ignored. And when we get to the end, you'll not only understand what happened, you'll understand what had to happen. The house was never quiet after my sister died. Not really. It was like her voice still echoed in the cracks of the wooden floors and in the soft creak of the staircase at night. My niece, Kendra, came to live with me just 2 weeks after the funeral. She was 19, just barely old enough to legally make her own decisions, but still young enough to be easily underestimated. She wore grief like a costume, tight in some places, exaggerated in others. She cried loudly when people were watching, but her eyes were always too dry when no one else was around. At first, I tried to ignore it. After all, she'd lost her mother. I chalked it up to shock, to trauma, to whatever excuse made it easier to keep her under my roof. But deep down, something about her always put me on edge. And that ring, the antique emerald ring my grandmother gave to me when I turned 25, it started going missing at strange times. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. Then I found it tucked in Kendra's sock drawer. I didn't confront her. Not then. Why? Because part of me wanted to see just how far she'd go. It's strange, isn't it? How we test people not with words but with silence. The ring was valuable, sure, but it was more than that. It was the kind of thing people in my family fought over. It was worn by women who'd survived wars, buried secrets, and raised children who never knew half the truth. It had weight, literal and emotional. Kendra saw it as a prize, a trophy, maybe even a shortcut to a life she hadn't earned. I saw it as a test. And when I tell you what happened next, you'll see why that test became the last one she ever got to take. Let's back up a bit, though. You deserve the full picture, and I need to lay out the foundation before I hand you the keys to the ending. I'm not rushing you to the twist because what matters isn't just what I did, it's why I did it. Kendra was always bright. Too bright, maybe. Her charm was polished like glass, beautiful to look at, but cold to the touch. She could walk into a room and have everyone eating from her palm within minutes. At my retirement party, she made a toast that made me cry. 2 days later, I discovered she'd taken my debit card and used it to buy herself a luxury purse. When I confronted her, she smiled like I just told her a funny joke and shrugged. "You have more than enough," she said. That was her justification. That was her truth. Here's where the story starts to bend, to twist in ways you won't expect. I'd spent years writing my will, updating it, adjusting it as relationships shifted. My late husband and I had built a life from the ground up. No kids of our own, so we poured everything into our business, our home, our community. When he passed, I was the sole keeper of it all. I wanted it to mean something. Not just money for money's sake, but something lasting. Kendra was in the will. Not a massive share, but enough to give her a head start in life. But then came the lies. The manipulation. The time I caught her trying to forge my signature on a check, and she played it off as a joke. The strange way she always asked about, what happens to all this when you're gone? And finally, the night I caught her in my study, holding my will in one hand and that ring in the other.
She didn't know I was watching.
She stood there, whispering to herself, saying things like, "This should have been mine. It will be mine." And that's when I made my decision. Not out of rage, not even out of heartbreak, but out of strategy. Kendra thought she was playing a long game. She had no idea I was playing a longer one. Now here's where you need to lean in, because I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone before. I rewrote my will that night. The entire thing. I removed Kendra from it completely. I transferred assets, locked down accounts, and gave power of attorney to someone she'd never expect. And then I buried it. Not metaphorically. Literally. In a fireproof, tamper-proof box under the oak tree in the backyard, next to the grave of my first dog, where no one ever looks. And just to make sure no one found it by accident, I buried something else with it, the ring. The one thing Kendra wanted more than the money. The bait and the truth, sealed together, waiting for the right time to resurface. I left a decoy will in my desk. Let her find that one. Let her think she'd won. Because the moment she thought the game was over was the moment I truly began to win. You're probably wondering, why go through all that? Why not just confront her, call the authorities, cut her off entirely? Because confrontation is temporary. Shock wears off. But silence? Mystery? That lingers. That drives people mad. Kendra wouldn't just be denied what she wanted. She'd be forced to question why.
To dig.
To panic. To unravel slowly. And that, dear viewer, is where the real story begins. And we're just getting started. Because you haven't even met the lawyer who helped me pull it off, or the neighbor who saw something they shouldn't have. You don't know about the voicemail Kendra left the night before I disappeared for a weekend without telling anyone. You don't know how she nearly confessed to everything at a family brunch, thinking I'd already passed. You haven't seen the unraveling yet, but you will. Keep watching, because the next part of this story doesn't just shift the tone. It explodes everything you thought you knew. The final twist? It's not about the ring at all. So, let me ask you, what would you do if someone tried to rewrite your legacy? What would you risk to protect it? Keep those questions in your mind, because before the story ends, you'll have to answer them too. I should probably tell you more about Kendra's mother. My sister, Claire. She was the wild one growing up. The kind of woman who could charm a room, then burn it to the ground if she felt cornered. Claire had a way of making chaos look elegant, and maybe that's where Kendra got it from. When Claire passed suddenly from an aneurysm, I was heartbroken, yes, but I also felt a strange sense of responsibility. She'd made so many reckless choices toward the end: credit card debt, unpaid taxes, men who left faster than they arrived. And in the middle of that mess was Kendra, who'd learned early on that love came in unstable doses. I took her in because I couldn't bear to watch her fall into the same traps. But it's hard to know when you're rescuing someone, or when you're just giving them a front row seat to plan your downfall. The neighbors thought Kendra was a blessing. Especially Evelyn, the retired librarian next door who'd known our family since the 70s. She'd wave at Kendra every morning, sometimes even bring over banana bread just because. I think part of Evelyn wanted to believe we were still the wholesome family we once appeared to be. She didn't see what I saw. Didn't see the way Kendra lingered by the liquor cabinet late at night, or how she would scroll through real estate listings in my name on my tablet. But Evelyn did see something else, something she would only tell me much later. She saw Kendra letting a strange man into the house while I was away. Said he was in a suit. Looked too polished to be a friend. Said he only stayed 15 minutes and left with something in his coat pocket. That conversation stuck with me, because I never found out what he took, if anything. But around that same time, my spare set of keys went missing. And the will I kept in the safe, the decoy one, the one I intentionally planted, had been opened. Folded. Read. I didn't confront her then either. It wasn't time. Instead, I made sure the cameras I had installed, old, dusty, half-forgotten, were reactivated. Not because I wanted to catch her stealing, but because I wanted to see how she moved when she thought no one was watching.
What I saw.
That was the beginning of the end. She would go into my office when I was asleep, search drawers, take photos of documents, and always return to that ring. She'd hold it, try it on, whisper to herself like she was rehearsing a victory speech. There was something deeply unsettling about it. Like, she wasn't just after the jewelry or the inheritance, but the identity it carried. The legacy. As if she thought by claiming it, she could rewrite who she was. And then came the phone call. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd just come back from the pharmacy, and the clouds looked like they were ready to burst. Unknown number. Male voice.
Calm. Too calm.
He said, "Ms. Langley, I believe we both have an interest in the same piece of property." I froze. I hadn't spoken a word. He continued, "You've hidden something that doesn't belong to you. Kendra may be young, but she's not alone." I hung up, heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. That was when I knew things had gone further than I realized. This wasn't just about greed. This was organized. And if she had someone helping her, then I was running out of time. You might be wondering, why not go to the police? Why not tell someone? Trust me, that thought crossed my mind every day. But here's the thing. When it comes to family, it's never simple. There's shame.
Guilt.
The fear of looking like a paranoid old woman who's lost her grip. And Kendra was smart. She never took anything I could prove. Never said anything that couldn't be explained away. And besides, the cops don't go chasing rings and revised wills unless there's a dead body involved. No, this had to be handled with care. Like a chess game. One wrong move, and she'd slip out of reach forever. So I leaned into the role. The sweet old aunt. The slightly forgetful woman who leaves her tablet unlocked. I watched. I listened. I baited the trap. But then things started going missing that I hadn't intended to sacrifice. My late husband's cufflinks. A gold locket with my mother's photo. Bank letters. Nothing major, but enough to make me doubt whether I was still in control. That's when I started to suspect someone else was involved, someone from inside the house or close to it. Maybe not Evelyn, but someone Evelyn trusted. A family friend? A neighbor's caretaker? The strange man in the suit kept coming back to mind. I replayed Evelyn's words over and over again. Too polished to be a friend. What if he wasn't here for Kendra? What if he was here because of her? The more I tried to trace the threads, the more tangled they became. My financial advisor called to confirm a strange withdrawal request I hadn't made. When I asked him who authorized it, he said he had it in writing signed in my name. That's when I knew Kendra had taken things to a new level. And yet, part of me still didn't want to believe she was capable of going this far. Maybe that's what makes these situations so dangerous. You keep hoping you're wrong. You keep telling yourself they're just lost, or desperate, or confused. You don't want to accept the possibility that the person you once read bedtime stories to is now orchestrating a slow-motion betrayal right under your nose. I started keeping a notebook, hiding it in a hollowed-out cookbook in the kitchen. I wrote down everything: dates, times, interactions, things I overheard, things I felt. My own private journal of the descent. But the paranoia grew. One night, I woke up to find the living room light on. Kendra was asleep on the couch, TV flickering. But my study door was slightly open.
I hadn't left it that way.
And inside? Nothing looked obviously disturbed, but the energy was different. It felt violated. Like someone had entered not just the room, but the mind it protected. I started wondering if she'd found my journal. If she knew that I knew. And if so, what would she do next? That was when I realized something chilling. Maybe I wasn't the one watching anymore. Maybe she was watching me. And if that was true, then this wasn't a game anymore. It was war. But the kind you wage with smiles and silence. With carefully placed clues and shadowed threats. With decoy wills and real ones buried in plain sight. And as I prepared for what came next, I asked myself the question that still haunts me to this day. What if Kendra wasn't the only one trying to take something from me? Because secrets don't stay buried forever. And sometimes, the deadliest ones are planted by the people you trust the most. Keep watching. The real betrayal is still coming. It started with the photograph. A small, unassuming Polaroid tucked between the pages of an old gardening book on my living room shelf. I hadn't opened that book in years. I wasn't even looking for it. It just happened to fall when I was reaching for something else. The picture was worn at the edges, clearly handled more times than it should have been, and yet I didn't recognize it at first. It showed my late husband, years younger, standing beside a woman who wasn't me. They weren't embracing or doing anything scandalous, but something about the way he looked at her, the way his body tilted toward hers, made my heart sink in a way I couldn't explain. I stared at it for minutes, my fingers trembling slightly, trying to place the face. It wasn't until I noticed the necklace the woman was wearing, an emerald pendant nearly identical to the family ring, that something inside me twisted. I'd never seen her before, and yet, it felt like I had. That's when I realized the story went deeper than Kendra. Much deeper. The next morning, the photograph was gone. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't told anyone about it. I'd placed it in the drawer of my nightstand, somewhere I thought was safe, and now it had vanished without a trace. I turned the house upside down, retraced every step, checked the trash and even the backs of picture frames, but it was as if the photo had never existed. That was my first true moment of panic. Because if someone had gone into my bedroom, into my private drawer, and stolen something I hadn't told a soul about, then I wasn't just being watched, I was being monitored.
Closely.
Intimately. And whoever it was didn't want me remembering the past. It was around this time that I received an anonymous envelope in the mail. No return address. No postage. Just my name in uneven handwriting across the front. Inside was a single index card with a typed message. Asterisk, stop digging. You won't like what you find. Asterisk, no signature. No explanation.
Just that.
The message was clear, but what chilled me most was that the envelope had been placed directly inside my mailbox, meaning it hadn't come through the post office. Someone had been on my porch, close enough to reach the front door, close enough to slip something into the box while I was asleep inside. I kept telling myself, maybe it was a prank, that someone was trying to spook me, but deep down I knew better. The stakes were higher now, and I hadn't even figured out what the real game was. All I knew was that the ring, the same one Kendra obsessed over, was connected to a part of my husband's life I didn't understand. And now, it wasn't just about protecting it from her. It was about uncovering why she wanted it so badly in the first place. Maybe she didn't even know the whole truth herself. Maybe she was just being used. That's when I started paying more attention to Jackson. Jackson was my groundskeeper, quiet, polite, and always punctual. He'd worked for us for years, even before my husband passed. Never asked questions. Never lingered longer than necessary. But lately I noticed small shifts. He started arriving early, staying a bit too late. Once, I found him standing near the old oak tree in the backyard, the exact spot where I had buried the real will and the ring. He claimed he was trimming weeds, but there were no tools in sight. His hands were clean, his shoes muddy. I didn't press it at the time, but it lodged something in my chest. A suspicion I didn't want to entertain, but couldn't ignore. To make matters worse, my home security system, recently updated after all the strange incidents, began glitching. The cameras would go offline between 2 and 4 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. I contacted the company, but they claimed everything looked fine from their end. I checked the footage myself and found 3 blacked out hours. Every night. Same window. No alerts. No explanation. That's when I realized someone wasn't just sneaking around, they knew how to bypass the system entirely. Which meant this wasn't an amateur. And whoever was involved had experience covering their tracks. Still, I kept my mask on. I played the part of the forgetful aunt. I let Kendra think she had the upper hand. But internally, I began unraveling. Not because I was scared of what she might do, but because I was scared of what I might remember. That photo. That necklace. The way my husband always kept that old lockbox hidden in the attic long after we had replaced our safe. I started to wonder if he had secrets of his own. Not the kind that break marriages, but the kind that ruin families. What if the ring wasn't just an heirloom? What if it was tied to something bigger, something he never intended for me to know? One night, I snuck into the attic with a flashlight. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was thick with dust and memory. I found the old trunk, the one he'd always said was just tools. But when I pried it open, it was empty, except for a faded journal, brittle with time. Most of the entries were mundane, notes about lawn maintenance, business trips, petty disagreements, but the final pages caught my eye. In shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Asterisk, if anything happens to me, don't trust the girl with the green eyes. She knows more than she should. She isn't who you think she is." Asterisk, my husband had written those words months before his fatal accident. My breath caught. Kendra had green eyes. I sat on the attic floor for what felt like hours, clutching that journal like it held the answers to everything. But the more I read, the more questions I had.
Who was he talking about?
Kendra? Someone else? And why had he kept that warning hidden away where no one would ever find it? As I climbed back down the stairs, still dazed, I heard a noise in the kitchen. I froze. It was late, well past midnight. But someone was in the house. I turned off the flashlight and crept to the corner of the hall. From the shadows, I could make out a silhouette standing by the sink. Not Kendra. Taller.
Male. Come.
He was pouring himself a glass of water, like he belonged there. I blinked, and he was gone. No door opened. No footsteps. Just silence. The next morning, Kendra was humming. Bright, cheerful, like nothing had happened. But when I checked my nightstand, the journal was gone. Just like the photo. Something was closing in. I could feel it. And that's when I got the phone call. The voice on the line was familiar. Too familiar. One I hadn't heard in years. A voice I believed had vanished long before Kendra ever came to live with me.
Come.
Measured. Just 2 words before the line went dead. Asterisk, she lied. Asterisk. But who was he talking about? And which she did he mean? The words kept echoing in my mind. Asterisk, she lied. Asterisk, 2 syllables, vague and dangerous, that somehow unraveled the small sense of certainty I'd built around Kendra. I wanted to believe it was about her. That the voice on the other end of the line, unmistakably belonging to Anthony, my husband's estranged younger brother, had called to confirm everything I already suspected. But the more I turned the phrase over in my mind, the more unstable it became. Because Anthony had vanished nearly a decade ago after a bitter inheritance dispute, one so ugly it left him effectively cut off from the family. He hadn't attended the funeral, never reached out, never responded to letters. We all assumed he was either hiding out to escape debt or worse. So, how was he suddenly back? Why now? And why say just those words, asterisk, she lied, asterisk, before going silent again? I didn't have time to dwell. That same afternoon, I received a trembling call from an old friend, Miriam, the woman who handled my estate planning for over 15 years and had retired just 6 months prior. She hadn't spoken to me since she'd passed the legal file to her replacement, a bright young lawyer named Emily, who had barely started working when I planted the decoy will. Miriam sounded shaken. Said she had something she needed to tell me but wouldn't say it over the phone. All she would say was, "I got a letter too. Same handwriting as the one you showed me last year. We're both being followed." My stomach dropped. I had never told anyone about the envelope I'd received. Not the message, not the handwriting. Not even that it existed. But somehow Miriam knew. I agreed to meet her at a small coffee shop just outside town, neutral ground. She arrived late, her hands shaking as she placed a thick manila folder on the table between us. Her eyes darted around like she expected someone to walk in behind her. She opened the folder and slid over a set of documents, old court filings, sealed correspondence, and a black and white photo that made my pulse freeze. It was the same woman from the Polaroid, the one with the emerald necklace, but this time, she wasn't smiling. She was standing in front of a courthouse, handcuffed, escorted by 2 officers. Miriam leaned in and whispered, "Her name's Lillian Crane. She was your husband's ex-fiancée. Before you ever met him. She was arrested for fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, They scrubbed most of the records because your husband didn't want it following him into his political career. I felt the air go thin around me. This was bigger than Kendra's manipulations. This was decades of deception being dredged up, and now it was crawling out of the past like it had claws. I asked the question I dreaded asking. Asterisk. Why do you have this? Asterisk. Miriam hesitated, then confessed that 2 months before her retirement, someone anonymously sent her the exact same photo with a post-it note that read, Asterisk. You missed something. It's not over. Asterisk. At the time, she thought it was some kind of extortion attempt and filed it away. But now she believed it was connected. That someone was forcing us all to remember the parts of the story we tried to forget. Worse, she said someone had been watching her. Her mail was tampered with. Her security cameras at home had mysteriously stopped working the night her garage was broken into. Nothing taken, just rifled through. A warning. We left the cafe in silence, but I knew from the way Miriam looked at me as we said goodbye that she was scared in a way I'd never seen before. Not just of what we might find, but of who might be watching us dig it up. That night, I returned home and noticed something was off. The air in the house felt heavier. The kind of quiet that didn't feel natural. I found Kendra in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, but something in her demeanor had shifted. She was calm. Too calm, and when I asked if she'd seen anyone near the house that day, she laughed and said, You think someone's stalking you now? Maybe it's all that murder mystery stuff you watch. Then she looked me dead in the eye and added, Or maybe you just don't remember things like you used to. It wasn't just a dig. It was a threat, a subtle suggestion that she had an upper hand. That maybe, just maybe, she had read something I didn't want her to see. I retreated to my room and double-checked the hidden folder where I'd stored copies of the rewritten will and my husband's journal entries. The folder was still there, but the journal was missing again. I'd locked it in a false bottom drawer beneath my jewelry box, but someone had found it. That journal was the only piece connecting my husband's warning to Kendra, or whoever else he'd feared. And now it was gone. I was furious, terrified, but more than anything, I felt exposed. Someone was dismantling my safety one piece at a time, and I no longer knew who to trust. My lawyer? The neighbor? Even Jackson, who suddenly stopped showing up without explanation. It felt like the world around me was folding in, and every ally was a potential traitor. But then came the voicemail. It arrived just after midnight, from a blocked number. I listened to it 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. The voice, Anthony's again, was shaky, and this time longer. You don't know the whole story, he said. Lillian never went away. She just changed names. The ring, it's not just a ring. She's coming for it. They're all looking for it. And you're not safe anymore. The message cut off there. My heart raced as I stared into the darkness of my room, wondering how deep this hole went. Because if Lillian never left, and if she had a new identity, what if she had been close all along? What if she wasn't a memory from the past, but a living shadow in my present? And what if I had already let her into my home? I couldn't sleep that night. Not even close. The voicemail from Anthony kept playing in my mind like a broken record, his voice cracking beneath the weight of something he wasn't saying. She never went away. That phrase lingered like the scent of something burning. I sat in bed for hours, clutching the edge of the comforter, listening for any sound, any creak of the floorboards or gust against the windows. My house, once a quiet refuge, now felt like a trap designed to keep me in and everyone else out. Every corner held a shadow I didn't trust. Every silence sounded too deliberate. I kept the lights on, but it didn't help. It just made the dark places seem darker. By morning, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. The fear. The messages. The woman in the photograph. Maybe grief was finally catching up with me. I tried to convince myself it was just anxiety, a byproduct of isolation and unresolved family stress. But denial is a fragile shield, and mine shattered within hours. I went to check on Miriam. I had planned to bring her a lemon cake she liked, something small to thank her for the files and her honesty. But when I arrived, the gate to her small suburban home was ajar, the front door cracked open just enough to make my skin crawl. I called out her name, cautiously stepping inside, already knowing something was wrong. The house was too quiet. No kettle boiling. No classical music playing from her old radio like it always did. Just the eerie stillness of absence. I found the kitchen stool overturned, tea leaves scattered across the floor, and her phone buzzing repeatedly on the counter. Missed calls, unread messages, and one voicemail marked urgent. I didn't listen to it. I couldn't. I was already gripping the countertop, trying to keep myself from collapsing under the sudden realization that Miriam wasn't just missing. She'd been taken, or worse. The cops arrived after I called it in, but they didn't seem to grasp the full weight of it. There was no sign of forced entry, no struggle. Just a woman gone, her last moments completely untraceable. They asked routine questions and promised to investigate, but I saw it in their eyes. They thought she'd just wandered off. Maybe had a mental break. Retirees do that sometimes, they said. But I knew better. Because people don't disappear into thin air the day after confessing they've been followed. I barely made it back home before the panic set in. Every nerve in my body was pulsing like it had just been jolted awake. I kept looking over my shoulder while driving, watching the same silver SUV appear in my rearview mirror at 3 different intersections. It never got too close. Just enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't even sure if I'd locked the front door that morning. I hurried inside, locked every entry point, and drew the curtains shut. The ring, the will, the photograph, Miriam's warning, Anthony's call. All of it started looping in my head like a suspense movie where the protagonist starts realizing they're in the final act, and everyone is playing a part but them. But what broke me wasn't fear. It was betrayal. I tried calling Jackson, the groundskeeper, hoping maybe he'd seen something, anything, that could help. But his number had been disconnected.
Just like that. Gone.
I called his sister, who occasionally helped him with odd jobs on the property. She hadn't seen him in days. Said he left town suddenly. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just vanished like he'd never existed. That was the moment I finally allowed myself to say it aloud, even if only in a whisper. Someone was cleaning up loose and star. People close to me were being removed one by one. Not killed, maybe. Not yet. But relocated. Silenced. And I couldn't tell who was orchestrating it or how far they'd go. I felt like I was unraveling, my entire life stitched together by a series of well-kept illusions that were now splitting at the seams. The ring, that cursed heirloom, no longer felt like a symbol of family or history. It felt radioactive, like it held something people were willing to disappear others for. But what? A hidden code? A map? A secret legacy I had been shielded from for decades? Or maybe something even darker, something passed down from generation to generation like a curse no one dared talk about. And then, just as the day was slipping into night, and I was convincing myself to go to the police again, I heard it. A knock. Not at the door, but at the back window. The one that faced the garden. A deliberate, rhythmic tapping, 4 knocks, then silence. I froze. My heart raced. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally summoned the courage to peek through the curtain, no one was there. Just the swings swaying gently in the breeze, though there was no wind. I turned away, trying to catch my breath, and then I saw it. An envelope. Slid beneath the back door. I asked her, flatly, if she had any idea who the woman in the old photograph was, the one from my husband's past. Her eyes widened. She didn't respond right away, just stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Finally, she whispered, "You mean Lillian?" I felt my heart stop. "You knew her?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "She raised me," she said. "Not full-time. Not like my mom. But when my mom was traveling or with one of her boyfriends, Lillian would come. She said she was a godmother of sorts. She gave me the necklace. Told me the ring in this house matched it, and one day, it would be mine." I was speechless. That necklace. The one that mirrored the ring's unique emerald cut, the same one I'd seen in the old Polaroid, and again in the court photo. Kendra had worn it at least a dozen times in front of me, and I'd never made the connection. I'd never even asked about it. It had been in front of me this entire time, a clue so obvious I missed it. Kendra wasn't just obsessed with the ring because it was a family heirloom. She'd been groomed to want it.
Coached.
Fed stories that made it her destiny. Lillian, the woman who nearly ruined my husband's life before disappearing into the system, had resurfaced under a different guise. Through Kendra. Through trust. Through manipulation. And then Kendra dropped the bombshell that shifted everything. "She's not gone," she said, eyes locked on mine. "She never was. I think she's Emily." I blinked, confused. "Emily who?" "Emily Renshaw," she said. "Your new estate attorney." The blood drained from my face. The one person I had trusted to hold the new will. The one who replaced Miriam. The one who had access to every piece of my estate. I tried to laugh, to dismiss it as a coincidence, but Kendra pulled out her phone again and showed me a picture. A candid photo taken in a mirror at the law office, with Emily slightly turned. In her reflection, the side profile was unmistakable. A little older, different hair, but the same sharp jawline, the same eyes. I grabbed the old photo from my nightstand, the one Miriam had uncovered, and held it next to the image on Kendra's phone. My fingers trembled. They matched. It was her. Lillian Crane had never disappeared. She had changed her name. She had changed her face. And we had no idea who else had already been turned. The storm that rolled in that evening felt like something out of a thriller, the kind that doesn't just rattle windows, but vibrates through your ribs. The sky was bruised with thick, rolling clouds, the air sharp and static-charged, like the whole world was holding its breath. Kendra and I hadn't spoken much since the revelation about Emily, about Lillian. We were no longer adversaries, not even really family anymore. Just two women caught in a web spun long, before either of us realized we were flies. We moved around the house like survivors of something unspeakable, collecting papers, documents, jewelry, the journal, anything we could use to prove what we knew. Because after tonight, there would be no second chances. We were going to confront her. And we weren't going to do it on her terms. The meeting was arranged over email, one I sent from a burner phone, pretending to be Anthony. I told her I had something she needed. Proof the will had been rewritten. That the ring had already been sold.
That she'd lost.
I knew her pride wouldn't allow that to go unanswered. She replied within minutes. Told me to meet her at my husband's abandoned cabin near the lake, the one he used to escape to when life got too loud. She claimed she just wanted to talk. But I knew that tone. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted control. By the time we got there, the cabin was soaked in shadow. No lights. No signs of life. Just silence, thick as molasses. Kendra stayed in the car, phone ready to call for help, while I approached the door. My hands were cold despite the summer heat. I opened the creaking door and stepped inside, flashlight in hand. The room smelled of dust, cedar, and something slightly sour, like metal or old blood. And then I saw her, sitting calmly in the rocking chair by the fireplace, as if this were just another estate planning session. "Eleanor," she said softly, like she hadn't destroyed half of my reality. "I was wondering when you'd figured out." I didn't speak. I just stood there, eyes burning into her. The woman I'd trusted with my life, my home, my legacy, wasn't just a fraud. She was a ghost from my husband's past. A con artist who had rewritten herself so well, she had almost taken it all again. She motioned to the empty chair across from her.
"Sit.
Let's finish this." I sat, slowly, never taking my eyes off her. "Why the ring?" I asked. "Why now?" She laughed, soft, bitter. "Because that ring was never just a piece of jewelry. Your husband, David, he was hiding something inside it. A microdrive. With names, accounts, transactions. The kind of leverage you could hold over very powerful people. He never told you because he never fully trusted you. Or maybe he was protecting you. Either way, he kept it from both of us. But I knew it existed. And I knew where it had to be." My chest tightened. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about blackmail. About secrets wrapped in silk and emerald. I swallowed hard. And Kendra?
I asked.
You used her.
She owed me, Lillian snapped.
Her mother owed me. Claire made promises she couldn't keep. Your family took everything from me. I simply came back to take it back. Her voice cracked at the edges now, the composed lawyer mask crumbling. I could have ruined David when I had the chance. I didn't. I let him go. But he never let me forget. Never gave me what he owed me. So I made my own plan. And then, without warning, she pulled something from her coat pocket, a small, rusted key. My breath caught in my throat. It was the key to the family mausoleum, my husband's final resting place. The place where I had buried the real will and the ring, wrapped tightly in a velvet pouch inside the sealed urn I had lied about scattering. My mind raced. How did she know? Who told her? She smiled. You should really vet your help better. Jackson was very talkative once I found the right pressure point. I wanted to scream, but instead, I reached into my own pocket, pulled out the microdrive I had extracted from the ring the night before. I'd smashed the setting open with a hammer, terrified of breaking it, only to find the tiny sliver of silver tucked inside. Lillian's eyes widened for the first time. She stood. Give it to me. I didn't move. Give it to me, Eleanor. Or you and that spoiled girl out there will vanish, just like your little friend Miriam. I met her eyes. She's not dead. A silence. A twitch in her expression. Then she smiled. Not yet. And that's when Kendra burst through the door, holding her phone up like a weapon. The whole thing's recorded, she said. Everything. The threats, the confession. You're finished. Lillian turned slowly, laughing again. But it wasn't fear. It was mockery. You think that's enough? Do you know how many people I've buried with secrets? You two are just loose ends. She lunged then, not for me, but for the drive in my hand. The next few seconds blurred together in a whirlwind of struggling bodies, knocked furniture, and falling glass. The flashlight crashed to the floor, plunging the room into shadows, lit only by the flickering fire in the hearth. I held on to that drive like it was my soul itself. She screamed. Kendra shouted. Something sharp cut my palm. And then, silence. Lillian lay on the ground, breathing heavily, the sharp corner of the fireplace mantel having struck her temple. Not fatally, but enough to stop her. We stood over her, shaking, the microdrive still clenched in my bloodied hand. Sirens wailed in the distance. Kendra had managed to send the live stream to my lawyer, the real one, along with the cabin coordinates. Help was coming. But just before the police arrived, just before we could finally breathe, Lillian lifted her head and whispered something so faint I almost missed it. She wasn't your niece. I stared at her. What did you say? She was mine. The door burst open behind us before I could demand more, officers rushing in to secure the scene. But her words echoed louder than the chaos. Kendra stood frozen beside me. And I realized I didn't know anything anymore. The days that followed were a slow unraveling of truth, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. Lillian, if that was even her real name, was taken into custody, but not before she managed to sow one final seed of chaos. Her words haunted me, twisting and burrowing into the fragile peace I thought we'd finally secured. Asterisk, she wasn't your niece. She was mine. Asterisk, I didn't want to believe it. Not after everything. Not after the fire, the lies, the fear that had stretched me to the very edges of sanity. But I couldn't ignore it either. The ring, the inheritance, the sudden obsession with legacy, none of it had ever been random. Kendra's arrival hadn't just been an act of desperation or ambition. It had been part of a plan I hadn't seen coming until it was too late. So, I hired a private investigator, someone far outside our circle. Someone with no connections to the family. No ties. And when he returned 3 weeks later with a thin manila file and eyes full of pity, I knew. The birth certificate, sealed and forged decades ago, bore Lillian's name. Kendra wasn't my niece by blood. She had been planted, raised like a weapon, trained in charm and deceit. And yet, she had chosen me in the end. That was the hardest part to reconcile. Because despite everything, Kendra had saved my life in that cabin. She had stood between me and a woman who'd used her like a pawn her entire life. She had chosen truth over loyalty, even when it meant destroying the only identity she'd ever known. And for that, I couldn't hate her. I couldn't even blame her. The night after the final court hearing, when the case was sealed and the drive had been turned over to federal agents, we sat on the porch of my house in the fading evening light. The old swing creaked beneath us, and neither of us spoke for a long time. The garden smelled like jasmine and something older, earthy, grounded. She finally broke the silence with a single question. "Do you think he knew?" I looked out across the yard, thinking of my husband's journal, his cryptic warning about green eyes, the ring, the false will. I nodded slowly. I think he knew. I just don't think he wanted to believe it. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt quietly, sold the lake house, removed every trace of Emily Lillian from my legal and personal records, donated the rest of the family jewelry to a museum, keeping only the empty ring setting as a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. I rewrote my will, this time by hand, stored it in a sealed box at the bank, and made peace with the fact that legacy is more than what we leave behind. It's what we choose not to carry forward. I stopped looking over my shoulder, even though shadows still lingered around the edges of my memory. Miriam resurfaced weeks later in a small town 2 states away, shaken but alive. She had gone into hiding after being threatened, waiting until she was sure it was safe. When we reunited, she hugged me like we had both escaped a shared nightmare. In many ways, we had. As for Kendra, she left the house on a foggy morning in late September, suitcase in hand, her eyes more grounded than I'd ever seen them. She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for forgiveness, just thanked me for seeing her as more than what she was raised to be. I watched her walk down the driveway, the past unraveling behind her like a quiet exhale. I don't know where she went. Maybe somewhere cold, maybe somewhere warm. But I hope she finds peace, even if she has to create it from scratch. She deserves that chance. We all do. But sometimes, in the quiet hours just before sleep, I still hear the knock. That rhythmic tapping on the back window. For beats, then silence. I get up every time, even though I know there's no one there. Just the wind. Just memory. Just the remnants of a story that was never really about a ring, but about identity, obsession, and the choices that echo across generations. I learned that monsters don't always come with sharp teeth or dark coats. Sometimes they come with warm smiles, legal degrees, and the keys to your most sacred secrets. And while the ring is gone, its ghost still lingers. Buried in the cracks of this old house, in the pages of journals long burned, in the hearts of the people who still believe blood tells the whole story. It doesn't. Sometimes, family is forged through fire. And sometimes, it burns everything down before the truth can bloom. But if you've made it this far, if you've heard every twist and still wonder what became of the real Will, I'll tell you this much. It was never buried with my husband. It was never buried at all.